Sam Darnold was a bust, until he wasn't. Now Justin Fields is following the same blueprint to expose the NFL's biggest lie about failed quarterbacks. And the proof is sitting in one building everyone's ignoring. Act 1. The Bear Trap. How Chicago taught Fields to fail. To understand how Justin Fields got buried in the depth chart, you have to go back to the moment before he ever threw a single NFL pass. The Bears didn't just draft him, they traded up and surrendered massive draft capital to secure their supposed franchise savior, while the entire city of Chicago lost its collective mind. Then there was the Andy Dalton situation. A month before the draft, the Bears signed Dalton and their official Twitter account posted a photo of him with the caption QB1. The tweet sat there quietly until Chicago drafted Fields in April, at which point the internet dug it back up, and it went everywhere. It wasn't a joke or a bit, but a sign that the organizational chaos had already started before Fields even buckled his chin strap. On paper, the logic actually made sense because bringing in a veteran to let a rookie sit and protect his confidence is usually the smart play. The problem was that Matt Nagy had already privately promised Dalton the starting job just to get him to sign his contract. Run the math on that timeline for a second. You draft your future in April, but your head coach made a verbal commitment to a different guy months before training camp even opened. Nagy was already fighting for his life on the hot seat, which meant Dalton wasn't a mentor. He was a human shield used to keep a coach employed for one more season. If you want more autopsies on how NFL teams systematically break their own stars, hit that subscribe button because this is just the first layer of the wreckage. Fields wasn't developing in a stable environment. He was stuck behind a 33-year-old placeholder while the offense lacked any identity, any scheme, or any real runway for a young player to take off. Reality hit in Week 3 when Andy Dalton went down with an injury. Fields got his first career start against a Cleveland Browns defense that was anything but a soft landing spot. The Bears' offensive line was a disaster that year, ranking 28th in pass blocking and allowing defenders to live in the backfield on more than 35% of dropbacks. Myles Garrett personally accounted for 4.5 of the 9 sacks Fields took that afternoon, and by the end of the game, the rookie had managed only 6 completions for 68 yards. That wasn't a bad quarter of football, that was the entire game. Most people looked at that box score and decided they'd seen enough to label him a failure. What they ignored was an offensive line giving up pressure on 1 out of every 3 plays, and a receiver room where Allen Robinson had already mentally checked out of the building. Darnell Mooney is a talented player, but he was a number 2 receiver being forced to act as a primary option for the 28th ranked passing attack in the league. The Bears also suffered a league-worst 15% drop rate that season, and not a single receiver or tight end on the roster ranked inside the top 32 at their position. You could have dropped a prime Josh Allen into that dumpster fire, and he still would have struggled to survive. But here is the detail everyone missed, and it actually matters for his future. Nick Foles was in that room, and as a Super Bowl MVP with elite football IQ, he was more than willing to pass that knowledge down. According to people inside the building, the dynamic between Fields and the veterans never actually clicked. Foles tried to share high-level concepts in situational football, but Fields wasn't absorbing the information, and that professional friction eventually spilled over onto the field. The organizational failure and the individual struggle were running on parallel tracks the entire time. The Bears provided no scheme, no protection, and no weapons, while Fields started developing the habit that would follow him everywhere. When the structure around him got heavy, he stopped thinking and started reacting, retreating into his instincts instead of working through the progression. 2 years later, he sat in front of a microphone after losing to Tampa and admitted he felt robotic because the coaching staff's focus on pocket mechanics was crowding out his ability to just play the game. That tension between the system the Bears tried to install and the way Fields is naturally wired was never resolved, it just got louder every single year. When 2022 arrived, everyone got distracted by the highlights. The Bears fired one Matt and hired another, bringing in Luke Getsy as the new offensive coordinator, and for a brief window, Fields became the most electric player in the sport. In Week 9 against Miami, he torched the defense for 178 rushing yards and shattered Michael Vick's 20-year-old record for the most rushing yards by a quarterback in a single game. The internet went crazy and the highlights played on a loop all week, but the scoreboard told a much different story. While the highlights were great, the Bears finished 3-14 that year. Through the first month of that year, Fields sat dead last in passer rating and completion percentage, while the team averaged less than 100 passing yards per game. That was historically low volume, the kind of number that doesn't show up in the modern era. And while the running ability was a weapon, every defensive coordinator in the league was already taking notes. By the second half of the season, the blueprint was out. Contain the run lanes, keep Fields in the pocket, and force him to win with his processing speed. That is exactly where the entire experiment started to fall apart. Act 2. The robotic press conference and the film that buried him. Year 3 was supposed to be the moment the argument finally ended. The Bears brought in a new coordinator and gave Fields a legitimate alpha receiver in DJ Moore. But while the city of Chicago was willing to be patient, that patience had a very short fuse. The environment they built for him was a disaster from the jump. In 2022, Luke Getsy's scheme sat at 28th in total offense and dead last in passing. And while those numbers improved in 2023, they only climbed to 20th and 27th respectively. This was the supposed developmental lab for a franchise quarterback. For 2 straight years, the Bears lived in the bottom third of the league while the front office tried to convince everyone they were actually building a winner. The season started with a loss to Green Bay, followed by another to Tampa, and the offense looked just as hesitant and broken as it did the year before. After that Tampa game, a reporter asked Fields why he was struggling, and instead of dodging the question, he admitted he felt robotic and suggested the coaching might be the reason. Within hours, the Fields blames coaches headline was everywhere. He tried to kill the story by pulling reporters to his locker that afternoon to take all the blame himself, but the damage had already been done, because the correction never travels as far as the original quote. The word robotic became the theme of the 2023 season, giving every skeptical fan a single word to describe exactly what was wrong with his game. While the media played with their new buzzword, NFL defensive coordinators were busy using a 3-part blueprint that made Fields' elite athleticism look completely irrelevant. By Week 3, the rest of the league had the answers to the test. That Week 3 game against Kansas City was a total execution. Fields went 11 for 22 for a measly 99 yards, and the Bears were down 34-0 by halftime before eventually losing 41-10. The season wasn't even a month old, and it was effectively over. After that blowout, the conversation changed from "is the team failing him" to "what does the tape actually say?" And by that point, there was enough evidence for analysts to stop being polite. 3 specific patterns were killing him on every drive. First, he held the ball longer than almost any starter in the league because he was staring down his primary target and telegraphing every throw. This gave defensive backs a full second to react before the ball even left his hand. When that first read was covered, he didn't cycle through his options, but instead froze up and drifted into the pass rush until he either took a sack or tried to run for his life. That isn't a bad offensive line, that's a processing failure that happened even when the pocket was clean. Second, defenses were weaponizing his inability to read post-snap rotations. They would show one look before the snap and then rotate into something completely different, knowing Fields would commit to his initial read and couldn't reset his feet fast enough to adjust. The anticipation throws and hitch timing releases you need to survive in the NFL just weren't there. Third, his legs had become a total crutch. Once defenses learned to contain the edges and keep a spy in the middle, the offense died because Fields never learned how to dissect a defense with rhythm throws from the pocket. He had the elite arm and the elite speed, but the mental processing couldn't keep up with the physical gifts. PFF's mid-season numbers had already sounded the alarm on a terrifying stat. Fields was the worst quarterback in the NFL on plays where at least one receiver was actually open. People blamed the offensive line for the high sack totals, and they deserved some of that heat, but a huge chunk of those hits came because Fields refused to let go of the ball when he had a man open. The final numbers in Chicago tell the whole story. He went 0-22 in games where the opponent scored at least 21 points. Out of 46 qualified starters studied over that time, he was the only one who didn't manage to steal a single win when the score got a little high. Every other quarterback in that group found a way to win at least once, but Fields never did. With the first overall pick in his pocket and Caleb Williams waiting in April, Ryan Poles finally pulled the trigger. The Bears traded Fields to Pittsburgh for a conditional 6th-round pick, which was the same price Jacksonville paid for Mac Jones after he was benched and embarrassed in New England.
It didn't matter that their situations were different because the league viewed them as the same tier of player. The NFL wasn't just moving on from Justin Fields, it was closing the book on the entire 2021 quarterback class. Act 3. The Steelers' window and the Jets' trap. Pittsburgh wasn't supposed to be a fresh start, much like a low-risk experiment. Mike Tomlin saw the traits that Chicago failed to develop, but he also knew exactly when he was going to pull the plug regardless of what the scoreboard said. We have to be honest about what that trade really was. The Steelers needed a cheap backup with upside, and they got a 24-year-old athlete for a late-round pick that wouldn't cost them anything if he failed. This was a one-year audition with zero strings attached, and nobody in that front office was making long-term plans around him. However, Pittsburgh provided something Fields never had in Chicago, and the results showed up the moment he took the field. He finally had a real offensive line and a locker room
governed by Mike Tomlin's authority rather than one held together by hope and duct tape. When Russell Wilson went down with a calf injury, Fields stepped in and led the Steelers to a 4-2 start. He put up over 1,100 yards passing and 5 touchdowns against only 1 pick, while adding 289 yards on the ground with 5 more scores. The players were bought in and the energy in the building was electric, with several people in the organization admitting the team felt different with him under center. The success came because Arthur Smith built a scheme that was deliberately stripped down to hide Fields' weaknesses. They limited him to 2 read progressions and leaned heavily on designed rollouts and RPOs to keep him from having to process a full NFL defense from the pocket. Within those specific guardrails, he looked like a completely different player than the one Chicago had spent 3 years drowning in the deep end. But then Tomlin made the call to bench him. As soon as Wilson was cleared by the doctors, the Steelers chose veteran status over winning momentum. They sat a quarterback who was 4-2 and trending upward for a 35-year-old who hadn't played a snap all year. Even though the players and the staff wanted to stick with the hot hand, the organization went the other way. The result was a disaster, as the Steelers went into December at 10-3 and then collapsed with 4 straight losses to end the season. The offense that looked alive with Fields became slow and predictable under Wilson, which was the exact reason the team eventually decided they needed a total scheme overhaul for 2026. The scoreboard proved Fields was the better option, but Pittsburgh let him walk at the end of the year anyway, quietly moving on, just like Chicago did. Then the Jets called, mostly because being desperate is what the Jets do best. They handed Fields a 2-year, $40 million deal and dropped him into a situation that was basically Chicago with a different jersey. He was playing for a first-year head coach in Tanner Englund and an offensive coordinator in Tanner Engstrand who had never called plays in the NFL before. To make matters worse, Garrett Wilson was the only receiver on the roster who could actually scare a defense, and he missed 10 games with a knee injury. Without a deep threat to worry about, defenses just loaded the box and dared Fields to beat them with his arm. He couldn't do it. The Jets were sitting at 0-7 when owner Woody Johnson went in front of the cameras at the NFL fall meeting and buried his own quarterback. He told the media that it's hard to win with the quarterback rating they had, and joked that if they could just complete a pass, things might look better. When the man who signs the checks says that publicly at a league event, it isn't just a frustrated comment, it's a death warrant. In the NFL, when the owner delivers that verdict, the rest of the building stops debating and starts looking for a replacement. Fields was benched 6 games into the season without a single win. He came back later in the year when injuries forced the issue, made 9 total starts across the full season, and finished with a 2-7 record. His career as a first-choice starter in New York was over before the Thanksgiving turkey was even carved. The Jets' move looked like a career-ender, but 1,100 miles away, Andy Reid was watching that same tape and seeing something different. He saw the one specific trait that Patrick Mahomes used to change the game forever. If you want to understand why Kansas City is a rescue mission instead of a graveyard, you have to look at how they used the Sam Darnold blueprint to save a career.
Act 4. The Darnold Blueprint and why Kansas City changes everything. Take a look at the Sam Darnold timeline and then try to tell me Justin Fields is in a different boat. Darnold was the 3rd overall pick, but he walked straight into a New York Jets disaster that defined organizational failure for 6 straight years. We heard the same tired processing criticisms, the same turnover narratives, and the same whispers that he was nothing more than a career backup. the reality is that the Jets didn't just fail to develop Darnold, they actively taught him how to play bad football, and they did it with incredible speed. A leaky offensive line forced him into desperate, try-hard decisions, while a static, predictable scheme under Adam Gase stripped away every tool a rhythm quarterback needs to win. There was no motion, no play action, and no defined reads to help him out. He wasn't playing quarterback, he was just trying to survive the afternoon. Fields' time with the Bears reads like a carbon copy of that same chapter. He dealt with a bottom-tier line, a complete lack of weapons, and a revolving door of coordinators who couldn't stay on the same page. Chicago never built a scheme that matched what Fields could actually do on a football field. Instead of developing a young star, they ran him through a cycle of survival mode football until his bad habits were baked into his DNA. But this is where the blueprint actually kicks in. After things fell apart in Carolina, Darnold signed with San Francisco to sit behind Brock Purdy. Think about that for a second. The former third overall pick was holding a clipboard for a guy drafted with the very last pick in the draft who was busy taking his team to the Super Bowl. Darnold later called that experience ego death, because at that point you either blame the world or you look in the mirror. He chose the mirror and spent a full year inside Kyle Shanahan's timing-based system, stripping his mechanics down to the studs. He learned to quiet his feet, trust his progressions, and let the play develop instead of trying to force a miracle on every snap. He had to unlearn every single thing the Jets had drilled into him. Now, Fields is sitting in the exact same room as Patrick Mahomes, learning Andy Reid's system at the exact same crossroads. If you need proof that this blueprint works, just look at what happened when Darnold finally got his moment in Minnesota. Kevin O'Connell gave him elite weapons, a solid line, and a play caller who actually believed in him. Those results weren't some fluke or a lucky streak. Darnold put up 4,319 yards and 35 touchdowns with a 102.5 passer rating while leading the team to a 14-3 record. Having Justin Jefferson on the field acted like a gravity piece, pulling safeties and linebackers out of position and opening up the intermediate lanes where Darnold thrives. His job was to deliver the ball on time because the system created the windows, and he finally had the footwork to hit them. The league noticed, and eventually Seattle signed him to a 3-year deal worth $100.5 million to be the guy rather than a temporary bridge. He followed that up with 4,048 yards, 25 touchdowns, and another 14-3 record that ended in a Super Bowl ring. This was the exact same quarterback the Jets had packaged and sold to the league as a total bust. That is our control group, and it's the only proof you should need. Fields is currently in the same seat Darnold occupied before he exploded in Minnesota. Andy Reid doesn't force his quarterbacks to fit a rigid mold. He builds the entire mold around what the quarterback does best. He turned Alex Smith into a consistent Pro Bowler and then turned Patrick Mahomes into the greatest player to ever touch the position. Fields' dual threat ability actually gives Reid more creative tools to work with than almost any backup he's ever had in the building. The designed runs, the rollouts, and the read option packages that keep defensive coordinators awake at night all become lethal weapons in Reid's hands. Nothing in this league is guaranteed, and Fields still has real developmental gaps that won't just vanish because he changed his zip code. But for the first time in his professional career, he's in a room where the system is built around his talent rather than a coordinator on the hot seat trying to save his own job. That's all Sam Darnold ever needed to save his career. One right situation can change everything. The same game film that got Fields labeled as a bust is the same game film that shows a quarterback who never had a real environment to succeed in. Darnold proved that the NFL gets it wrong on players whenever it gets the organization wrong first, and Kansas City is the first place that actually fits Fields' skill set. Be a superfan for my channel and help me reach my subscriber goal before the season kicks off. Drop your take in the comments. Does Fields get his Minnesota moment in Kansas City, or is the window already closed? Smash that like button if you think the bust label was always a lie, and subscribe for more takes nobody else will give you.